I want to go ahead and kick things off right on time. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Kate Wigman. I am the COO of Rise Collaborative based in St. Louis. And as we've all realized now that we're in day 2057, I think, plus or minus, of COVID world, virtual meetings are not going anywhere anytime soon. And I know a lot of the people on this call and people part of this community are, whether it's that we're type A, we're overachievers, it's important to us to have quality and, going from good to great. So that's what Jill Farmer is here to do for us today, is help all of us go from good to great so that in the long term, we're able to lead better, more effective and impactful virtual meetings. So without further ado, I'd love to turn things over to our incredible presenter for today, Jill Farmer.
Oh, thanks so much, Kate. It's great to be here. For those of you guys who don't play around with Zoom all the time, if you want to click in that right-hand corner where it says speaker view, that way you'll be able to keep track of what it is that I'm talking about as we go through our session together. So why does this matter? Does it matter that we get better at video conferencing, video meetings? A couple of key reasons that I think are going to be the foundation for what we're talking about today. Number one, it's become a necessity in the last 4 months because of this massive disruption to our world, thanks to COVID-19 and related events. These unprecedented times mean that we have had to use this as a necessity to communicate in business and settings and outside of business settings as well. And that process of the necessity to use this means that companies have started integrating it, I think, for the long term. They are saying, I don't think it's going to fully replace, of course, in-person meetings and conferences, and we still need that person-to-person contact, but it certainly is going to be woven in ways that we need to stop thinking of this as a stopgap way of communicating. And I think it's time to embrace, thrive, and shine in video conferencing, both for internal use, like some of you were talking about using within your teams, and for client use. We're not going back. So it matters because we're not going back anymore, first of all. And secondly, this presentation matters because since it is new, a lot of us feel awkward. We feel it's even frustrating for us to figure this out. And so it matters to us because we all need to get more and more comfortable at using this technology so that we can show up at our best. It's a proficiency. And so that's what my intention for you guys is that we get some additional proficiency at working with this. Zoom is kind of, and rocking video meetings, which I've been doing a lot of presentations for my corporate clients, is a beautiful marriage of two things for me. In my past life, I was a reporter and anchor here in St. Louis on television. So communicating via electronics and camera was always something that was meaningful and a powerful part of the work that I'm doing. And now the work that I've done for over 10 years, 11 years since I opened my practice is time and stress management, coaching, and consulting. So a big part of that work has been making meetings matter. Right, because so much of the time in our corporate and business settings, we just have meetings for the sake of having a meeting, for the sake of having a meeting. And now we have all this data from organizational psychologists and others that tell us that poorly run meetings or meetings that don't matter to people tend to contribute to things like burnout and low performance. And so having meetings that matter is important to me, and I think it could be important to you. So we're going to marry some logistics things on how to look and feel great by using Zoom, as well as some other things that have to do with making meetings matter. So just for fun, if you guys go down to the chat section on that bar, I'd love to hear on a scale of 1 to 5, where do you rank yourself? 1 is, I hate Zoom. I don't know much about it. I feel really uncomfortable using WebEx, Zoom, UberConference, Google Meetup, any of the other technology for video meetings, not my jam. 5 is, yeah, I love it. I'm rocking it. I wish other people liked it as much as me, and so I'm trying to communicate that to them. So no judgment, just kind of where you are on that scale of 1 to 5. Yeah, so if we have some people that are comfortable, no surprise, people that are most comfortable were the first to jump on, and a lot of middle of the roaders. And the people that are saying, I don't want to tell you that because I'm embarrassed, and that's cool too. Okay. What you can expect to me in our time together today are easy to implement ideas, like ridiculously easy stuff that you can start implementing today. No complicated tech talk here. A lot of the features of Zoom and WebEx and all of these technologies, there are fantastic video tutorials for free on YouTube. And I'm not going to waste your time doing step-by-step video tutorials on utilizing some of the features, but I really encourage you to do that if you're going to be trying to lead meetings particularly, or do any type of presentation work, because there's good resources out there for you. We're going to talk about best practices for creating outstanding meetings that are efficient and meaningful and deliver results. Efficient, meaningful, deliver results. And big spoiler alert, that's going to cross over into your in-person meetings too. So it's going to be applicable to both video meetings and in-person meetings as well. My intention for you and what you can expect is that I want you to up your game in this format. That's what our time together today is designed to do. I want to tell you a quick story before we get into some of the other tips and tricks and hacks and content. So during COVID-19, fortunately, I did not get the virus, or at least that I know of. But I did have another medical thing that came up, and nothing serious, but one of those things that kind of had to get taken care of and treated. And so I had to have a doctor's appointment. And the first doctor's appointment I had was with a doctor, woman who was new to me. And I couldn't believe how positively she embraced our telemedicine appointment. It would have been way better if we could have seen each other. She could have seen me in person, more familiar to her. But she was being really careful to practice medicine to the best of her capabilities during our appointment together. She made a diagnosis, we did some blood work, and then when the follow-up appointment, which was with another physician, to look at the blood work, really we just almost could have been done on the phone. That physician made it extremely clear that he was not happy with the format. He hates telemedicine. He hates having to have meetings this way. He hates having to use it. And it just was and really he made kind of my appointment be all about him and how much he didn't like using this technology. And it was a great example for me to see I cannot love video meetings as much as I want to be with somebody in person. That can be very true for you. And I want to honor that. I'm not here to say you should love video meetings and want everybody to do it. But if you make resistance to this medium and this format, take up space in important and meaningful things that you're trying to deliver that are in line with your goals and intentions in your business and in your life, it's going to be felt on the other side. So I encourage you not to do that. So I want to set us up for success today. So during our time together, I'm going to share with you just a few things that I want us to all be on the same page about. Okay. And so setting us up for success, I'm going to ask you guys to focus. It is so tempting. I know it. It's hard for me too. I have ADD. So it's very hard to not have multiple browsers open and to not have my phone and to not be doing all kinds of other things when we are doing any type of a video meeting or listening to and learning from a webinar. But I'm going to ask you just for today, and maybe even for other things like this, that you close all those other browsers, shut down your phone, and focus your attention on our time here together so you can walk away with some practical, tactical things. Quick side note from my other life as well. There is no such thing as multitasking. There is no such thing. The brain science on this is crystal clear. When you are switching between different tasks, it's called, you are actually, from a brain science perspective, task switching. You're not doing multiple things at once. And when you're task switching, a lot of things back and forth quickly, you're lowering your efficacy on each of those things. There was a study in England from a few years ago that said that when you're trying to multitask 3 or more things, you are as effective as somebody who's stoned. So don't do it. Don't do it. Stay with us. Focus. Okay. Number 2, mute. I'm going to ask you, anytime you have a group over 5 people, you really need to ask everybody to mute and then unmute when they're talking. Some people are like, oh, I don't want to ask people to mute because then if they have something to say, they forget to unmute. We can all learn how to push the button on that gray toolbar that looks like a microphone and unmute ourselves when we have something to say. but it just makes it in so far, this technology, it's single audio channel, which means that when somebody else puts their coffee cup down, or like what happened when we first came on today, somebody was putting a lozenge on in speaker view, they came up, we got a real close-up look of them doing that because it took over the audio, and that's not usually what anybody who's participating or wants to see. The chat feature we talked about, you guys found it beautifully, but again, that's just the chat box. That's where you can ask questions. And I'm going to take pauses throughout my time with you guys today to answer those questions. So put them there. Kate's going to monitor them, and that's what you can do. And then the final thing that I'll ask, just for sharing so that we can all be set up for success during our time together, is if you have to move to another location, because you got to answer the door or let the dog out, no problem. Just make sure you click on that video button, also on that gray toolbar. So you stop your video, because otherwise you make us pretty seasick. And it's just very good. It's just very good etiquette to turn off your camera if you're moving from point A to point B, and to invite other people attending your meetings to do the same. So that's how I'm going to set you guys up for success. And now we're going to talk a little bit about what I just call universal video meeting prep. These are things that with video meetings, we all need to be thinking about as we are establishing ourselves and getting more comfortable with this meeting. These are basics for all of us, whether we are attending a meeting, or whether we are leading a meeting, or whether we're leading a presentation or seminar. Also, another side note about that. I know some of you are thinking about this in terms of like, what if I want to do webinars, or what if I want to do sales presentations? Others of you are thinking about it more as a meeting for teams together at work, sales or technical training. This information, there's going to be something for everybody in here in terms of all of those different applications that many of you mentioned when we did the introductions. Okay, I'm going to say this real slowly and carefully. You cannot come to a Zoom meeting where your presence is necessary by trying to sign on 2 to 5 minutes before the meeting starts. The old way of just showing up for a meeting does not work when it comes to Zoom or WebEx. Now, if you're attending a webinar like this, I don't care if you come 5 or 10 minutes late, and it's no skin off the presenter's nose generally, or you can come in whenever the host is letting you in. But I had a situation recently where one of my physician clients was doing a huge grant proposal and kind of slid into her seat 2 minutes before she was ready to sign on. And it was one of those, Zoom wouldn't load, the audio stuff wasn't lined up, then she had to shut down the computer, and then she's linked on the wrong link. And she ended up about 10 minutes late to this really important video. And it's story after story. You guys might have them too, where it was just that kind of domino effect of technology feeling like it's conspiring against us. And then of course, from a brain science and time management perspective, we know that when we get stressed out because the computer isn't working like we want it to, that it actually sabotages our cognitive ability by at least one research study says 13 cognitive IQ points we lose when we get stressed out in fight or flight mode. And so we're really setting ourselves up for not success when we just show up and try to sign on. So 15 minutes ahead of time, that means 9 a.m. meeting. You're at your desk at 8:45 to get everything set up. Another quick thing that I just wanted to comment on that's come up in some of the corporate work that I'm doing, WebEx, Google, the Uber conference, and Zoom all have mobile applications, but they all have limitations to their mobile applications. So if you're trying to do anything with a size of group, particularly over 3 to 5, one-on-one meetings, those mobile applications can sometimes work well, but anything with a larger group, like for instance on, I think it's WebEx, you can't do any of the breakout meeting stuff when you're on mobile. I think there's some limitations on Zoom with that as well. So just from a professional perspective, if you're doing anything that's trying to convey meaningful information to a group of people, I would use a laptop or desktop as well. Okay, here is a checklist that I suggest you guys write down and put on a Post-it note and put it on your computer. So when you come and sit down 15 minutes before it's time to start your meeting, you have it in front of you so that it's, oh, I forgot this time, or oh, forgot that, just to help you be ready and show up at your best, and have the results you want for a meeting. Okay, I'm going to go through each one of these a little bit more slowly, but just so you have the checklist. It's alerts, audio, lighting and framing, and background. Okay, I'm going to go through each one of these so that you have an idea of what I'm talking about. Alerts. That's simply what I'm talking about with that is that's that ring or ding or that bell that a lot of us have on our desktops and laptops to tell us when a text is coming in, or when when we're getting an email, or perhaps when the Ring doorbell is somebody is at our front door or is delivering mail. They seem handy dandy, but the problem is if we don't shut them off in our system of our computer, then anybody else that's on a meeting with us when we are on our laptop or desktop gets to hear that ding every time, if we're unmuted, every time we get an alert. And it's just not particularly professional. It can be distracting. And it's just one of those things that a lot of people are like, oh yeah, how do I do that? You just go to the system's preferences part of your computer. Again, I'm not going to do a tutorial. I just gave you an example of what it looks like on a Mac, but it's very easy to do on PC. And you want to make sure that you just turn off sound for notifications. Also, I'm going to put on my time and stress management coach again as well. We know that people get more meaningful work done when they are engaged and what brain scientists call a state of flow. So every time you have those alerts set up on your computer, we think, oh, I got to get to those emails. What we're actually doing, it's like we're trying to fly somewhere and then we're landing the plane every dang time one of those alerts comes on and distracts or disrupts our flow or what it is we're trying to achieve. So I think it's a good practice anyway to turn those notifications off, but it's particularly if you want to up your game a bit and just look a little more professional, make sure you have turned those off on your device as well. Okay, next thing on your checklist that I gave you is audio. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that. Now, what I mean by audio is simply how you are taking sound in, how you guys are listening to my voice right now, for instance, and how you are being heard, or how your voice is being communicated. So when it comes to headphones, some companies feel really strongly that if you are on a company-related, if you're doing company-related meetings or communication, you need to have some form of headphones on from a privacy perspective, so that if you're working from home, for instance, nobody else in the space is going to have access to hear what it is you're talking about if it's proprietary. So I use, just as you can see my AirPods here, I noticed some of you are using that. Some of you use the headset, Amy and some of others of you, a headset like this that has the microphone and headphones on it. Some people say it looks like a helicopter pilot. I don't care. The aesthetics don't matter. It's the logistics that I think are the most important, is that you have a good way to hear what's being said. Headphones do also reduce the likelihood that you're going to have that thing happen sometimes where you get the feedback and that's kind of embarrassing because you accidentally have your phone, and they really help with that process. And in terms of your voice, again, if you're just attending a meeting, your audio quality isn't going to be as important. If you're presenting meaningful information, it sounds a lot better to have some form of a microphone. This is a cheapie. It's not a super expensive one. You can get a Snowball now for $30 on Amazon. So it's not an expensive investment, but it does, the difference when I tested these out, it does sound a lot like I'm a lot closer. I'm not in a sound booth by any means. This is kind of an echoey space. And so when I'm talking just on my computer, it sounds like I'm like a football field away. So this really does help with that. Your choice, but record yourself on one of a photo booth if you have a Mac, or one of the other software applications if you're using a PC, to see what you look and sound like to help yourself out. Okay, so audio, we talked about that, making sure that you can hear how you stand. Now we're going to talk about lighting and framing. So what do I mean by that? Okay, this is just me, a picture of me getting ready to do a presentation, and I am in front of a window at my house. No other special lighting, no filters. This is just me, what I look like at age 51 with natural lighting in my house, okay? This is what This is Exhibit A. Exhibit B is what I look like when I have a window behind me as opposed to having the window be in front of my face. So this is the window just in front of my face. It's me, my computer, and then the window is in front of my face. This is what happens when the window is beside my face. It's just not as flattering, right? On the one hand, I look a little silhouetted, but here's what I want you to notice from a psychological perspective. See how much more engaged and awake I look here than I do here? How much more present I feel like I'm right there with you more in this picture than I do here. And so if you can set up your laptop or desktop and use natural light for daytime meetings, it's really going to be ideal. And it's absolutely not capable. A lot of us are not capable of having that happen within our homes due to no fault of our own. My own setup, I can't really be in front of a window for using my desktop. So I really suggest you invest between $30 and $60 in a light ring. You can get them almost anywhere now, from Walmart to Amazon to Best Buy. And you don't, it used to be, this one, as you can see, has different color temperature options. And I think I paid $40 for it. So it really is a good option if you can't be in front of that window for natural light. And I'm using a light ring here. I just want to show you guys the difference between, and I don't have a camera that has an excellent built-in camera. It's okay. It's not great. But this is the difference between having my light ring off and having my light ring on. And I can control the color temperature a little bit too, just with arrows. Gives you an idea how it just warms me up a little bit as opposed to having the light off. Okay, so not a huge investment, but again, it just is it makes a difference in how engaged, connected, awake I look, okay? Also, talking about framing. As you can tell, I'm throwing a lot of my vanity to the wind here. Okay, pictured on the left is me using my laptop computer. And I mean, this is just me looking down at the camera on my laptop on my desk. I do have kind of a low desk. This is me when I have my, on the right is when I have my laptop propped up on two shoe boxes so that my, the laptop is at eye level. So left, it's nothing too tricky. It's just me having the laptop below me and looking down at the camera. On the right, it's me with the camera at eye level, okay? Big difference. Many of you are not 51 years old and have not had the benefit of growing an extra chin just for no good reason in the last years. I have. And so I say, why not go ahead and keep that extra chin for other secret uses that are not when I'm talking on a video conference call. So eye level is definitely going to be better. Another thing to think about when it comes to having your lighting and framing is something called the rule of thirds. When we're looking at a shot of somebody, for instance, when you're watching a movie or you're watching the news, you see the people are framed so that their eyes are in the top third of the frame. Where I have done here is a shot where I see a lot of people when they are doing videos and they have tilted their screen so that their face is kind of near the bottom. Okay, so this is me with my eyes at the top third of the screen, right? This is me when I have framed it with a lot of headroom with my eyes at the bottom. Before I describe this rule of thirds to you, you wouldn't have known why it looked a little weird, but that just looks a little weird, right? You don't feel as comfortable or professional in that when I'm communicating with you as you do when I'm looking at you from that perspective, okay? Again, it's just one of those simple tricks, and all you have to do is it's a very easy way. It's tilting your screen. That's me down at the bottom. That's me using that rule of thirds for my eyes up roughly. You don't have to make it perfect, but it's roughly a third of the way up the screen, which gives me just a more natural perspective. Okay, that's awesome, you guys. I see some of you in the gallery frantically tilting your screens to get yourself in that rule of thirds. When you're an attendee, doesn't matter. These are all things for when you're participating in what you're doing. Okay, another thing that I want you to think about on that checklist, right? We've talked about audio, we've talked about alerts, audio, lighting, and framing. And then the last thing we're going to talk about when it comes to that checklist to make sure that you're ready to show up at your best is background. Okay, this is exactly where I am today, but I was getting ready for a big video conference, a couple hundred people at a company on the coast last week. And then when I was doing my setup and practice and recording myself to make sure everything was set, oh, there's some dirty laundry that my husband generously decided to throw at the top of the stairs before I was there, right? We've all heard the stories of people not knowing what was in their background when full disclosure, when COVID first started, I was that person who almost walked into my husband's WebEx. He worked at home just for a couple of weeks before he had to go back to his office. But I was that person who nearly walked into his WebEx meeting in my bra because he didn't tell me he was at my desk and I didn't know anybody else was upstairs with me. So I'm not saying that anybody has to set up a professional movie set by any means for your background. I live in the city and this is my home office and it's kind of cool lofty space, so I like it as background. It does not have, it can be very simple. I know Martha earlier was talking about her, she was a little bored with her khaki, so she put up some animal print behind her and it looked great. So you want to just do something that's meaningful. I was doing a presentation on rocking your WebEx for a big tech company out in California last week, and 200 people from the company. It was an all hands meeting with the COO and CEO. And one of the guys who was one of the chief tech trainers kept speaking up, and he was in his basement with like in a workshop with just paint and rusty stuff and tools and everything all over, and like pinup from some old pinups from some old calendar behind him. And later on when I was talking to the CEO, she's like, he's been doing some training and pitches to some of our biggest clients. Like, I just hang a curtain up, dude. I had no idea until we had done this meeting. They had no idea. And he was really focused on the computer sharing part of it and kind of forgot that we do need to think about that background and what we're, what's happening with all of that as well. Okay. So again, I mean, this kind of goes without saying, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time with you guys on this because all y'all get it, and I know you do. But when we first started with this stuff, we could just sign in, and on a meeting, even if there was 5 or 6 people, we could say, oh, I'm on audio today. Now, and so we could, look like our Yorkie friend on the left. Now the expectation is, I'm not saying everybody needs to go get their hair coiffed at the groomer before a video, but you do want to show up at least semi-professionally. I was talking to an executive client of mine not long ago, and he was pretty frustrated with one of his high potential leaders because every time they had video meetings, he was in a ratty t-shirt and had not shaved for a long time and was literally, it's like he's either laying on his couch or a bed. Either one's a little creepy during the meetings. And so we just talked about how it's just, again, you don't have to be dressed up in, in your fanciest, highest level of professional clothing, but something that makes you feel good and is at least semi-professional is going to help you feel like you're not just at home and also participating in a communication that is business related and hopefully will deliver some meaningful results. Okay, so we are rocking and rolling with a lot of the ideas around how to use tools and tips and tricks to show up at your best. And we're going to talk about some more best practices. But I want to check in, Kate, in the chat. Who have we heard from and what questions need to be answered?
Yes, when you were talking about the microphone, you said Snowball. There was a question, is Snowball the brand of the microphone that you use? Or if not, what brand is it?
This one is Audio-Technica. And Snowball is, I think it's Snoball is the one that you can order off of Amazon. And it's good for podcasts and stuff too, if you're ever asked to be interviewed on a podcast or delivering or creating any video content. I like those brands. Anything else?
Sort of, although it wasn't directly asked, just clarifying. So you talked about the ring light. You mentioned it was about, 30, 40, 50 bucks. Do you recall the brand of that one as well, just in case anyone was wanting to procure?
I don't. And it used to be, even a year ago, they were kind of more expensive and trickier. Now they're available everywhere. And so I don't think it's as important, to have a particular brand. I do like the ones that have the feature where you can choose color temperature, and those are available even on the $39 ones now. So it's barrier to entry is pretty low, and I think it's pretty worthwhile.
Fantastic. We're good to chat.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about what we can do in terms of best practices for creating a meeting that delivers really meaningful results and that creates high engagement and is one of those things that people actually look forward to coming to, as opposed to like, oh, it's this thing I have to do again. I like to have my executive and corporate clients and leadership clients really think about this as producing a meeting, not just having a meeting, right? When we are creating a meeting with a purpose and a goal in mind, it's really producing a mini event with a purpose or an intention that's going to deliver a meaningful result. Producing a mini event with a meaning or purpose that's going to deliver something that matters is another way to say it. If you are fairly new to Zoom or WebEx and you are doing something that's going to require, and you're trying to deliver a lot of information, and there's a lot of moving parts. You want to have slides, you want to have video, you want to have breakout rooms. In WebEx, you might want to use polling, chat, whatever it is you want to do. I highly recommend that you ask a colleague, a friend, somebody you trust to assistant produce for you. It's what Kate does with these meetings. She's managing muting in case somebody has forgotten to mute themselves and there's sound coming up, managing the breakout rooms, monitoring the chat so that I'm not distracted and I can stay focused on getting the meaningful information to you guys. So there's no shame in that. Having somebody else sort of co-pilot with you on, especially if you have a lot of moving parts, is a really good idea. Another thing about meetings is a lot of us, and especially those of you that are in corporate settings, the meeting becomes a thing that we just sort of show up for and kind of think is automatically going to happen and something good is going to happen from it because, hey, we just have meetings. I have really noticed in my 11 years of doing this work that I'm doing that when people talk about low engagement at work, losing connection to their purpose or why their work matters, a lot of times they name meetings and meetings that suck their time and their souls along with them as a reason why they really lose engagement and purpose and in the work that they're doing. And I find that oftentimes when people talk about meetings being not good or poorly produced or conducted meetings, when I talk to the person who has put together the meeting, I found out that they really haven't done any preparation ahead of time. Duh. But I think it just needs to be said because I see it happen all the time. We need to set up, block some time on our calendars if we're a leader or somebody who is in charge of a meeting to do some prep ahead of time so that we make sure that we help create something that is a good use of people's time, okay? And the first number one question I want you to ask yourself when you set up or block that time on your calendar to produce or create a meeting that matters and is going to deliver results is, why does this meeting matter? Why does it matter to me? Why does it matter to the organization? Why does it matter to the people who are showing up? I'm putting a lot of emphasis on that because part of the work that I do is working with organizations, Fortune 50 companies down to startups, institutions of higher learning, and particularly in medicine, places from Washington University to Harvard Med School, talking about time and stress management issues. And a lot of the work I do is centered around burnout. And we know in 2019, the World Health Organization named burnout as a bona fide health issue. And one of the number one causes of what burns people out is they lose touch with why their work matters. So how you can play a role in helping yourself and the people on your teams and have a bigger ripple effect of anything you're leading is to make sure that you're clear on why something matters to you and to those that you're working on. So that's why I put an emphasis on it. A lot of times with meetings, we just fall into habit. You say, why do you do, I'll ask a leader or an organization or team, why do you have those meetings? Well, we've always had meetings on Tuesdays. Not a super engaging or enticing way to encourage people to be involved and engaged. This isn't a sales coaching presentation, but I'm going to do a quick sidebar. Telling potential clients when you would like to meet with them or when you are meeting with them, why the meeting is going to matter to them, why it's important to them, makes it much more likely that you are going to engage or them in a meaningful transaction or magnetize them into some form of relationship with you, as opposed to just say, I want to set up a meeting. Take it the extra step and name why you think, and looking at it through their lens, this meeting could really matter to them. There's good psychology behind why that's an effective step. So number one thing when we're getting meetings together is understanding why the meeting matters. Next, I want to talk a little bit about brainstorming. Particularly, I've had this, a lot of leaders and people have said, oh, I tried to have a brainstorming session on Zoom and it just did not work. It was a massive failure. So I want to talk briefly about brainstorming in general, and also brainstorming particularly on a video meeting or video conferencing, and how to make it work better for you. Organizational psychologists have studied brainstorming for a long time, so they kind of understand what components make it effective and less effective. If you're getting together with a group of people and you want to use their collective brain trust to come up with better ideas, it's generally not a good idea to just show up cold and have everybody brainstorm on the fly. A couple of reasons. One, everybody tends to meet in the middle, so you don't innovate a lot there because everybody kind of just comes to the middle. Some people get lazy and let other people take the lead, and so you don't necessarily hear from everybody. And then the biggest thing that I think is concerning about this is that whoever throws out the first idea, subconsciously everybody else kind of like, it's, you know, where the mud tracks get made is where everybody else follows the tracks. You end up following the same idea when people are talking, what people are talking about. So with Zoom meetings, super important if you're brainstorming. And also with Zoom particularly, we have that audio channel issue. So when people start trying to just throw out ideas, they're stepping all over each other and it's just awkward as heck. It's just not a very effective way to communicate. So when you want to do brainstorming or get some collective brain trust ideas in a Zoom meeting, a couple of ideas. Use breakout rooms so you can break people into groups of 2 or 3 where it's easier for them. It's kind of safer for them to come up with ideas. Or just ask everybody ahead of time to spend 5 to 15 minutes percolating, marinating on their best ideas on whatever the subject matter is, so that they come in with some fresh ideas. No ideas will be judged, they're all shared. And then you as a facilitator or leader call on people, use the chat feature, give everybody an opportunity to share the ideas they already have, and then you guys can build on those ideas as a group, as opposed to trying to just have them go cold, because that's, it makes it a lot more effective. And it's just one of those things that's come up a lot when I've been talking to clients about what, especially my corporate clients, about what's working and not working. And some have said, well, we can't use Zoom or WebEx for brainstorming. I'm like, you can. We just need to kind of adjust the way that we are doing it. So before I jump in on a few more best practices for keeping meetings interesting and engaging, any other questions or comments that we want to make sure that we bring up to the group? Kate?
I don't have any other ones in chat. Did you want to do an opportunity for people to unmute and ask questions?
Yeah, so if anybody has a question or comment, or any time they've tried any of these best practices that they've worked or not worked, I want to take a couple minutes and hear from you guys now.
Hi, my name is Julie Halunga. I'm in Denver, and hi, this is great information. One of the things I've noticed the difference between virtual and in person is after you do a breakout, they might have gone really well. They have lots of ideas, but the debriefing of those breakout sessions, especially with larger groups, seems to be a little bit more difficult. I've used the chat function, but it's not as effective, and wondering if you had any recommendations or ideas for that.
Yeah, so let me ask a question. So people are coming up with good stuff together, but when you come out, it just gets awkward. Are you specifically calling on a representative from each group to do the debrief, or are you letting it be more popcorny?
So I've asked them, like in the instructions before they go into the debrief, I have them have one person who facilitates the debrief or the brainstorm, and one person who's going to debrief to the group at large, so they know that in advance.
And you're finding that they are either not willing to share what they come up with, they're nervous, it's inarticulate. What would be some of the examples of what's not working?
That, and like I did it recently, it was a group of 100 people that all from one company. And so I didn't want the groups to be huge. So I kept 5 people in each group, but then that's 20 groups to debrief. Mm-hmm. We only had an hour and a half together, or an hour 15. So if we debriefed all 20, that would have been our whole time. We used the chat, but it wasn't that engaging, I found.
So a couple of ideas in that size of a group. I would just ask people to self-identify as the follow-throughs in the group and invite them to send an email that then will be shared out with everybody else. It doesn't have to stay totally within the organization, I mean, within what you're doing. The other thing is to assign out to somebody else who's a co-producer, that to have, instead of in a group chat, have down in that chat feature, you can send it to one specific person or participant. Ask them to send their debriefs to that one person or participant who happens to be one of those great people who can pull threads from facilitation, and then have that one person sort of be the reporter based on those 20 debriefs. So just based on that example, I think that would be a way that you could use it and still have some meaningful themes or threads come through to support the greater mission of what the meeting was about. Helpful?
Yes, thank you. That's a great idea.
That was a great question. Okay, a couple of other things that I want to talk about in terms of best practices for keeping the meeting interesting and engaging, which is, you know, challenging sometimes with video when we're asking people to stare at a video with us the whole time. So here are some ideas I have. Again, this is based on brain science. This is not just based on Jill pulling things out of the air. Ways that we know that people who are in meetings or attending learning sessions tend to be able to stay more engaged. One is visuals, right? You could look at me talking the whole time, and that might be okay if I'm a particularly engaging person, but for most of us, we get kind of tired of just staring at the same person the whole time. So I love using visuals. I think that can be really helpful. You notice I use slides, and I'm a big believer, again, this is true. I know Martha Freeman, who's an excellent coach and on the call with us today, for an excellent consultant on presentation skills, will tell us over and over again, very few words on our slides because it's too confusing for us to read a lot of words and listen to what you're saying. Use and also visuals, pictures and illustrations. Remember back when I showed you those flattering and then unflattering pictures of me? That was a lot more powerful than me having words that said frame it right or use lighting. It was much more instructive and interesting for me to show you pictures than in examples of how to and how not to's than just using words on screens. Mix it up if you can. This is a little bit of a higher level, but again, we know from the brain science that when we can look at visuals and then come back and watch an actual live person talking to us in an engaging manner, that helps kind of bring us into engagement as opposed and not go into zone out mode where we're as likely to go someplace else when we're listening to new information and content. Not everybody likes to jump back and forth. It's not a fun thing for you to do. So that's not fun for you to do. You don't have to do it, but it is an interesting tool in order to keep people engaged should you want to try it. Practice, practice, practice. I was just talking to a surgeon client about this last week, and they were saying, you know, I need to practice. I'm not super comfortable at this process, and I don't know how to do it. And I was like, well, just ask your friends and family for 5-minute meetings a few times so that you can get a few people on the screen. You can practice doing some of these things, and you get to start and end the meetings whenever you want. Using Zoom or WebEx, wherever you have your subscription, whether it's free or one of the other plans, but practice, practice, practice. It really, really, really makes a big difference. Also, tell stories. That makes it a little more engaging for the experience, so you're more likely to remember when somebody shares a story, like when I talked about the doctors who are the one who did a good job in using video telemedicine, the other one who didn't. I think that's important. And then, and the other thing that I think is super important to remember with these is to keep them short. It's hard. Sometimes we just get into the point where we have a 90-minute meeting or a 60-minute meeting because we're used to, and it's a lot easier to keep people's attention in that 50-minute mark or less, or 55 minutes even or less. So I suggest that you try to think about doing that. One other tool that I want to give you guys is I really like to, at the beginning of a video meeting, use what I call a success checklist. And the reason I use this is it came from Peloton. I have a Peloton bike, and I noticed that every time I got on my Peloton bike, the first minute of the ride is the instructors telling me how to use the knobs and explaining the same thing every time. And you think, well, gosh, some people, like I'm now over 100 rides on my Peloton. I know how to use the knobs, but it's still very important for me, right? It kind of calms me down. It centers me. I know when I'm starting. It's a good reminder. And for the people that are rides 1 through 10, they're still learning it, to have that kind of success checklist where they're telling me how to use this stuff. It's really helpful. So some of you have gotten really used to Zoom, and what happens is you're so used to it that you're presuming everybody coming to your meetings or everybody else that's there has the same level of comfort. And people can feel really lost if they've forgotten what the difference between gallery view and speaker view is in the upper right-hand corner, or how to mute. So I use, this will be familiar to you, those of you who were here at the start of the presentation, right? But I use the success checklist with every single meeting that I do. I invite everybody to focus. I tell them how to mute and encourage everybody to stay on mute until it's time to ask a question. I tell them where mute is on their computer so they can use it and available, and where chat is, and then how to stop video from that etiquette perspective, just reminding them that it makes people seasick when you walk around with your computer, and so that it's just good practice to stop video if you need to move away from your computer for any reason. Another final note that I wanted to make on before we open it up to the other questions. I really recommend doing a meeting agenda before you start a meeting. I know sometimes it's like, we know what this meeting is about. We don't really need an agenda, but a quick story. I've been under contract for the last, since 2019 at Harvard Medical School, specifically with the surgical team on a wellness initiative to work around time and stress management and burnout prevention for that team. And one of the chief surgeons, who I'm sharing this story with permission, changing some of the details so not identifiable, came to me and said, I'm trying to become a really good leader, but I get so frustrated with the other people on my team. We're supposed to have these research meetings, and I tell them on Wednesday, hey, we're having a research meeting tomorrow. Come with your research ideas and read up on the grant proposal information before you get there. And then they show up and they've forgotten and they haven't done it. And I said, well, we can't really control their behavior, but as a leader, let's try this change in your behavior to see if it helps. You set an agenda. She's like, well, the meeting's always the same. I said, sit down for 5 minutes and set an agenda with each participant's name, what the expectation is for them on there. So, you know, they set the agenda and say, first, Dr. Tom Jones is going to present on his research idea. Next, it's going to be Reka Miller, however you want to name that. And then you also, when you send out the agenda ahead of time, where people have a chance to give you information on it, you tell them, I expect you to spend 5 minutes reading through the agenda, gathering written or clear oral descriptions of the research that you'll be doing and understanding what the new grant guidelines are. You've given clear instructions ahead of time on your expectations. They know what to expect in the meeting. And she, when we had our session a month later, she's like, it was the best thing in the world. The meeting was half the time it usually takes. There was no frustration, shame, wandering around with idea stuff. It was just a really much more effective thing. So that's my plug for in that pre-meeting prep to make sure that you do use agendas. And then finally, a couple of other hacks and tips that have come up when I've done these presentations that I think have been really useful. If there's a lot of good ideas, sometimes you go to a meeting and there's a lot of good ideas over in the chat room, people are sharing books or resources, and you start trying to write them down, take a screenshot of it. It's a really effective way for you to hold on to information that you want to see. Very simple, take a screenshot. Also, don't ever write anything in a chat in any kind of a Zoom or WebEx meeting that you would not be okay with somebody taking a screenshot of and then being able to share. So just a little, two-sided detail on that. Using meeting rooms, Julie talked about what an effective way that was to get people engaged and talking to each other. If you're not familiar with how to do that, play around with it in one of your practice meetings. I think it's one of the best features that's come out recently that people are really beginning to embrace. And then also, we aren't, a lot of times in these Zoom meetings, there is just a degree of disconnection with each other when we're electronic as opposed to in person. So if you're facilitating particularly or leading a meeting or have some input on what's happening in a meeting, make room for some real personal connection, just like what Kate has done with these meetings. Open it up for introductions a little bit early. Start with a question. Tell everybody you're giving them 30 seconds to talk about one thing that surprised them this week or that they were interested to learn about or experience. And if that is not available, then take the time to reach out to individual people in the meeting and say, hey, can I do a 5-minute phone call with you, or text and just check in, so that there's a lot of great things about this medium, but it does not necessarily foster that personal relationship building that we experience when we're in person. So be intentional about adding some of those to your experiences. And then one more thing that I realized I forgot I want to talk about that's important, and that's eye contact, okay? When you are talking on Zoom, it's weird because there's a lot of times we're just looking at that tiny little light. So a lot of people will default to looking at themselves. Well, see what happens when I start looking at myself. So I get a little self-conscious and I start thinking more about what I'm looking like, which isn't so necessarily great, than I am engaging, communicating. See the difference? Yet all the time, people are actually looking at themselves when they're talking or presenting instead of looking at the camera. Get used to it. Anytime you are communicating meaningfully, we need to be looking at the camera, we're engaging. And if for some reason you feel like you need to be looking at yourself, adjust the frame. This is me looking at myself now versus where I was adjusted before, where I'm looking at myself here. Still much better for me to be looking at you in the eye, communicating with you. Okay, eye contact is super, super important. Kate, anything else that's come up in chat, and then we can open it up for final questions before we let everybody go.
Yes, eye contact was definitely one that came up, and I feel like we did a good addressing of that. But there was one of our attendees is trying to pivot a conference into a virtual conference, and there was a networking session that was a part of the in-person version, and they're trying to figure out how to pivot an in-person networking event to virtual. You kind of had started talking about, I think you did a nice intro to that, but I just wonder if you have any more, tactics, knowing that she's really trying to put together an impactful and effective networking session, which, as we all know, those can be awkward enough in person, let alone virtual. So any tips and tricks?
So again, I think the breakout rooms are really the way to go for any kind of virtual networking, or I like to call it relationship building. And then as a facilitator, it's just, sometimes people, it's a little we feel a little anonymous when we're a group of, 30 or so like we are today, and we're just sort of sitting in and listening. And all of a sudden, when we get put into breakout rooms, there can be a degree of like, oh, yeah, I got to show up here. So I think it's very helpful to when you are doing facilitated networking or relationship building using the breakout rooms, to have a very specific series of questions that you're inviting people. So not just like, well, introduce yourselves to each other and talk about what's meaningful for you. I recommend doing our RISE member in St. Louis, Beth Chesterton, is brilliant at this kind of facilitated networking, but she always has a series of questions. So you spend a few minutes with 2 people in a breakout room. Everybody has a chance to answer those series of questions, and then you come back to the big group and break people again. And so that you might even, for a group of 30 people, you might break people into 3 or 4 groups, so they really have a chance to connect to a number of people, but you're asking them to answer a specific meaningful question. What's the first job you ever had? What's something that you've discovered that surprised you about yourself? What's something that went wrong in your life that turned out to be great? Those are some of my favorites for creating warmth and engagement and relationship building. So did that answer that question?
I think so. And I love that and have stolen and borrowed that one as well. Something that went wrong that actually went horribly right. For sure. That's all I have from chat. Anybody want to pop off of mute and ask another question before we wrap up today? More questions the merrier. This is the time to get them out while we've got Jill live. Nobody? That's good. I mean, I tell you what, Jill, you have covered so much great content. Reminder for everybody, we've recorded this, which I know, we talk about how it's like, oh, if you missed the session, you can always watch it if you missed it. But I don't know about you guys, I tried to take a lot of notes, but you can also, even if you did attend live, you can rewatch this later. So it will be posted on Rise TV by tomorrow. Watch it, early and often, and enjoy it. Lots of great tips. Jill is available. She's on Rise Digital. You can reach out to her directly. She is generous to a fault with her time and talents, and I know would love to connect. And she's also one of those people I call a super connector. So she is a great person to build relationships with. She's giving, loves to make connections and find opportunities. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Jill, thank you for
It was delightful, and I really enjoyed it. And so I do this in companies and organizations all over the United States right now, doing a lot of time and stress management for troubled times, as well as other success building strategies, and also how to rock a video call or conference. Doing this programming in organizations all the time. So if you know of somebody that could use this, that would help in their internal or external client-facing professional or personal development, please reach out, because I'd love to support in any way I can.
Absolutely. We want to support you, Jill. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day and week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I look forward to seeing everybody online and in person, hopefully again very soon.